Okay, so that is Anathapindika's great request, or maybe his last words, to Sariputta. Okay, then after this discussion, Sariputta and Ananda leave Anathapindika's house. They go back to the monastery, and soon afterwards, Anathapindika passes away. Even though he might have been trying to meditate according to Sariputta's instructions, he didn't reach the goal. So his consciousness was not yet parinibhayati, was not yet nirvanized. And so he passed away, and he was reborn in the Tusita heaven. The Tusita heaven is 1, 2, 3, the fourth level of the 6 sense-sphere heavenly realms. And that is said to be the abode where the Bodhisattva Maitreya is now dwelling. And from there, when Gautama Buddha's teaching disappears, then at some time in the future, Maitreya Bodhisattva will descend from the Tusita heaven and come into the human realm and then become a Buddha. Okay, so Anathapindika is reborn in the Tusita heaven, and then it's said that in the commentary it said that after he was reborn there, and he sees his heavenly good fortune, and he ponders, how did I get to arise here? How did I achieve such good fortune? And when he ponders on that question, then he sees that, this all happened because of the merits that I accumulated as a supporter, a benefactor of the Buddha and the Sangha. And so then he thinks, let me come down and pay them a visit to express my appreciation. And so, of course, he doesn't come down like a human being, or he doesn't come in the middle of the day, but it's the practice. The devas come to the Buddha usually in the dead of the night when everybody else is sleeping and everything is quieted down. I think this would have happened much more often back in ancient times when the world was very quiet and relatively, I don't think the world was ever peaceful. I mean, there were wars going on all the time. But we didn't have all of this electronic gadgetry, which I think creates, my opinion, this is not from a Pali commentary, creates a kind of a vibrational field which is repulsive to the deities. And maybe it interferes with their own vibrational frequencies. And so they don't come down here to visit so often. But I would think in ancient times, when we didn't have all of this, these kinds of powerful forms of energy, like electricity, and all of these communications, lines of communication, electronic communication, and these, polluting the world with all of these substances that we're burning, creating so much dirt and pollution, then the deities want to keep away, keep a distance. But in earlier times, there would have been much easier communication between the divine realms and the human realm. So that's why we have scriptures from the great religious traditions which speak about encounters, frequent encounters between the human and the divine. Okay, so here Anathapindika comes to the Buddha in the middle of the night, and he recites some verses expressing his appreciation of the Jeta's Grove, which he himself had donated to the Buddha, and then giving some instruction on how to live the wholesome life, and then praising Sariputta. So he says, "Oh, blessed is this Jeta's Grove, dwelt in by the sagely Sangha, wherein resides the king of the Dhammaraja, the Buddha, the fount of all my happiness. So that's praise of the grove, the Sangha, and the Buddha. Then he speaks like words of advice to the world. By action, knowledge, and Dhamma, by virtue and a noble way of life, by these are mortals purified, not by lineage or wealth. Therefore, a wise person who sees what truly leads to his own good should investigate the Dhamma. Maybe that's significant coming from Anathapindika, who is not known to be an investigator of the Dhamma, and purify himself with it. And then he praises Sariputta. Sariputta has reached the peak in virtue, peace, and the ways of wisdom. Any monk who has gone beyond, at best, can only equal him. Okay, so Anathapindika recites these verses. The teacher, probably by silence, approves of them, or maybe he actually spoke approving them. And then Anathapindika vanished. Okay, then the next day, the Buddha addresses the monks and he tells them that he's sort of testing them, and he says, in the middle of the night, a young god of beautiful appearance came to me, illuminating this whole Jeta's grove. And after saluting me, then he recited these verses. Then he repeats the verses. And then he vanished. Okay, when he says this, then the Venerable Ananda says to the Buddha, he says, surely, Bhante, that young deity must have been Anathapindika, for the householder Anathapindika had perfect or full confidence in the Venerable Sariputta. Okay, then what the Buddha says is interesting. He says, first he applauds Ananda. He says, good, Ananda. Then he says, the Pali goes, Yava takang takaya pattabang anupatang tang taya, which means, very literally, as far as it might be reached by thinking, that by you has been reached. So that is a very literal rendering. Or that by you have arrived at that. So that's what's translated here. As far as reasoning goes, you have drawn the right conclusion. And then the Buddha says, that young god indeed was Anathapindika, no one else. Okay, the reason why the Buddha says this to Ananda is that Ananda is going by inference. He's drawing from the fact, probably first, that the deity praised Jeta's grove, and then he praised Sariputta. And so he thought that since Anathapindika has just died and our deity has appeared and praised the grove and the Sariputta, that must be Anathapindika. But the Buddha doesn't have to yavatakang takaya patang. He doesn't have to go by thought, by reasoning. The Buddha himself knows directly that was Anathapindika. Okay, and that is the discourse. Maybe we can take any questions that come up. Okay, Richard has, you could pass the microphone down to Richard.
There's two buttons on the mic. The lower one you want to push up, the upper one, you want to push the right, then it will be on.
Hello? Okay. Anathapindika is a sati? Is it S-A-T-I?
No,
No.
in Pali it's sati.
Sati. Yeah.
Sati. In Sanskrit it's shreshti, which it's a
Okay.
term that indicates a very wealthy person
Yeah.
who provides finances. I think his role, probably they started out originally, I think this
Yeah.
is the speculation, as gold merchants.
Yeah.
And then through dealing in gold, they accumulated a lot of wealth. And then they took on the role of providing wealth to the king
Right.
with the assumption that the king will eventually pay them back.
So he would have been a Vaisya, right?
Probably he was from the Vaishya class.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the thing that I'm wondering about is it's saying he was an upright man.
Yeah.
So I assume that means that he wasn't violating any of the precepts.
Yeah.
So you got the precept of right livelihood,
Yeah.
and you got the precept of non-killing,
Yeah.
right? Meanwhile, when he's supporting the state, I mean, he's basically a taxpayer, but at that time there was like not more than 1% of the population that did that, right? So when he's supporting the state,
Yeah.
he is the assumption that he's not thereby supporting killing, and when he's making his money by trading in gold
Yeah.
and such, the
Yeah.
assumption is that's right livelihood.
Yeah, first I'll take the second part.
Okay.
I'm assuming that gold would have been used as a medium of exchange.
Yeah.
And so this would be an essential medium of exchange. Yeah.
Well-
so I don't see that it's a wrong livelihood.
No, I suspect that at the time,
Yeah.
gold was used by relatively few people. It was the rich who had
Yeah.
gold.
Yeah.
Other people would have had the same kind of problem that's described in the Bible in Jerusalem, where, for instance, people were obligated to pay their taxes
Yeah.
in Roman currency, which they didn't have.
Yeah.
And so the first thing, I mean, that's why the money changers' tables
yeah,
were
yeah,
in the
yeah.
temple, right? So first thing they had to do was to go and exchange something to get the money,
Yeah.
to get, to be able to
Yeah,
pay.
yeah.
And I assume that's the status that gold would
Yeah.
also have had,
Yeah, yeah.
so that it was an instrument of oppression, because the conversion rates for the gold and
Yeah.
so on could be very
Yeah,
easily
yeah,
manipulated. And so people probably felt that
Yeah.
dealing in gold was quite oppressive and exhausting to them,
Yeah.
as for a farmer,
Yeah.
for instance, right?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if that is participation in that kind of system, that's not a violation of a precept?
Yeah, first, I mean, I don't know the details of Anathapindika's way of,
Yeah,
the details of his livelihood. It's
Yeah.
just that in the commentaries he's described as a sati,
yeah,
and what I've read is that the sati class had the function of, it arose from probably from the goldsmiths who were making ornaments, and
Yeah.
then when gold came to be used, it became the medium of, it came to be used as the medium of exchange.
yeah,
And so the satis were the class that had gold, and then they would provide gold to the king.
yeah.
Or they would provide gold to the king to conduct the affairs of state. Pasenadi was also a disciple of the Buddha. There are accounts of him engaging in a defensive war. I don't know the details of.
Okay. All right.
I
But
think
yeah,
I
also,
could just trust that Anathapindika, as a noble disciple, would not have himself been directly responsible for killing and oppressing others.
yeah, directly.
Yeah.
But then the way the precepts are written, for
Yeah.
instance, I won't approve of, won't support, and so on,
Yeah.
it seems to include indirectly too. And so what I'm trying to discover is what's the index of indirectness
Yeah.
that's crucial here. I mean, I understand that,
Yeah.
it's quite plausible that in his personal relationships,
yeah.
he's a very decent man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay? My question is about his impact on other people through these indirect relationships.
Yeah, this I don't know the details. But one thing that I should mention about Anathapindika, first, Anathapindika was not his actual proper name, but it was a sobriquet, the designation given to him, and it means, Anatha means the helpless, especially orphans and widows and poor people.
Yeah.
And Pinda means originally a lump, and it has the implication of giving food. So Anathapindika was one who gave food and other provisions to the orphans, widows, and the poor.
Well, is that kind of the equivalent in Buddhist, is that kind of the Buddhist equivalent of, say, seeking indulgences in medieval Christianity? I've done these bad deeds, so these good deeds will compensate for them.
No, it said that he was a very compassionate man and did this out of compassion.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Way in the back, Suki.
When Anathapindika called for Sariputta, the purpose of calling, I thought, was really to ease the pain. That was what I thought, because he was in such a terrible pain.
Yeah.
But actually, when Sariputta came, his Dhamma talk was like a really preparation of dying.
Yeah.
So, did he give any? I mean, that Dhamma talk also is just for easing the pain, or that he didn't really care? I mean, that was not the purpose of Sariputta.
By easing the pain, that would be the job for a physician. You mean to console?
Right.
To console and uplift?
So no one can console.
I think, we don't know so much of the details of the background. Whether Anathapindika thought that he was on the verge of death or just thought he was seriously ill and needed some inspiration, that I don't know. But it seems that Sariputta must have sized up the situation, and realized that Anathapindika didn't have much time left. And so his discourse, Sariputta's advice or his exhortation, the way I understand it, was based on the understanding that Anathapindika is about to pass away.
So that was the Dhamma talk on preparing for the death.
I think that was Sariputta's intention.
Right.
Yeah.
Then the Sariputta says you should train thus, and all those. I'm not really uncertain there. How? That's like you thinking. I will not do this. I will not attach on this. Those are all thinking. Now that's it. How? Is there any other train that he has to do it in any other suttas? Does it show? It's just the thinking there, and.
Well, it becomes more than thinking, but it becomes a way of training the mind when, excuse me, when these thoughts of clinging to the sense bases, the sense objects, the feelings, when those thoughts of clinging arise, then he's being trained to dispel those thoughts. And probably, we don't have the full discourse, but maybe Sariputta also said you should train by contemplating all of these things as being netang mama, neso hamasmi, na meso ata. This is not mine, this is not I, this is not myself. And so even though he's lying down, and though he's very weak because of the illness, but he could still direct his mind to contemplate in that way. That I don't remember, but there is another sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya. This is the Sottapatti Samyutta, the collected discourses on stream entry, where Anathapindika is very ill. And I think it's Sariputta that he sends for. It could be Sariputta or Ananda. I have to look at it again. And on that occasion, apparently, they could see that the illness was not as severe as in this case. So the monk who was speaking, whether Ananda or Sariputta, then reminded Anathapindika that he was a stream enterer, that he possessed the factors of stream entry, and so that he could rejoice in that.
Hi, Bhante.
Oh, yeah.
I just have a couple of questions.
Okay.
One of them is kind of a follow-up to what Suki was asking. Would it be correct to say that the term clinging could be defined as self-identification? Right?
I'd say self-identification is one aspect.
And
There's self-identification and also what I would call
craving.
taking possession of or claiming possession of.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think, so when you say I will not cling, it's kind of like you still have like that I.
No, this
It's
is
not.
just a verb of ordinary usage.
Oh, okay. All right.
In fact, even the way it's expressed, it even doesn't use in Pali, the pronoun isn't necessary. So when you have the verb upadi sami, it's
Right.
just the first person verb. So the I is implicit in it, but
But it's not, okay.
yeah.
And then my other question was, do you know the reason why lay people chose white as a color back in those days? Is it just
I think
arbitrary?
it indicates, it's just that it indicates purity, because
Oh,
they're
yeah.
observing the precepts of purity.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, I want to go on now, because I said we were going to do 2 suttas. So let us do the advice to Rahula, which is also a very short sutta. And you can see Rahula is a pabajita. He's one who's gone forth. He's a monk. So this is, but he's not dying. He's not dying here. But this is the Buddha's instruction to Rahula. And Rahula was, as you probably all know, is the Buddha's biological son. So according to the traditional life of the Buddha, this much I think may be part of the legend rather than fact, but it said that on the very day that the Buddha decided to renounce the household life and become an ascetic, his wife Yasodhara gave birth to a baby boy, and when they had to decide on a name, the Buddha chose the name Rahula because it said that the word Rahula means a fetter, because it's already he was married, so the wife was one fetter. And now, when he's just about to launch out in his great escapade, his quest for freedom, a little boy is born, and that's sort of binding him down, another thing binding him down to the household life. So he says the appropriate name is Rahula, a fetter. Okay, but after the Buddha reached enlightenment, when he came back to visit his native city of Kapilavatthu, at that time Rahula was 7 years old, and so his mother points out the Buddha to him and says, "You see that ascetic? That is your father. Go ask him for your inheritance." And so Rahula comes to the Buddha, 7-year-old boy, and says, "Please, Father, give me my inheritance." And then the Buddha thinks, if I were to give him, the family wealth, because he came from an aristocratic family, the gold and silver and properties, all of those things would just fade in time and perhaps even become a cause of bondage and unwholesome activity. Let me give him a truly world-transcending inheritance. And so then the Buddha turns to Sariputta and says, ordain the boy. And so at the age of 7, Rahula becomes a novice monk. And then the Buddha gives 3 discourses, or at least there were 3 in the middle-length discourses, addressed to Rahula. One of them apparently was given when Rahula was just still a very young boy, and this is Sutta number 61, which is basically the theme is not to speak falsely, because perhaps Rahula as a little boy, a mischievous boy, would maybe exaggerate things and speak falsely to others. So the basic theme is not to speak falsely, and before doing any deed of body, speech, and mind, to reflect on what one is doing and not do anything that's harmful to oneself, harmful to others. Okay, then when there's a discourse number 62, which was given when Rahula, we could conjecture, according to the commentary, was now probably in his adolescence, 16, 17, 18 years old. I think the commentary says he was 18 years old. So as we could even say a young man coming from royal family, he would have had very physically, he might have been very handsome, strong. And so he was attached, or at least he had the disposition to attachment to this body and pride, what's called the kshatriya pride. And so the Buddha gave him advice on contemplating the body in terms of the elements and breaking the identification with the body. So that would have been appropriate to him. And then going on to give him instruction in mindfulness of breathing as a meditation object. And now we come to this discourse where the Buddha is going to give him the instruction that leads him to arahantship, to the final goal. And so the sutta starts when the Buddha is alone in meditation, and then he thinks, I don't like this word deliverance, but I prefer, it's vimukti, which is liberation. The states that ripen in liberation have ripened in Rahula. Suppose I were to lead him on further to the destruction of the asavas, the destruction of the defilements. So what are these states that ripen in deliverance, ripen in liberation? So according to the commentary mentions the 5 spiritual faculties. That is faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. So through the years, Rahula must have been training himself based on the instruction that the Buddha gave in the earliest sutta on contemplating the body as being not self by way of the elements, through mindfulness of breathing. And in this way, he would have developed practicing vigorously, he's developing energy, doing all of this with mindfulness, so he's strengthening his mindfulness. As his mindfulness strengthens, he develops samadhi, and then he's been contemplating the 3 characteristics, impermanence, dukkha, non-self, in the body and the other aggregates. Okay, so this is the commentarial explanation. But I found that there's another sutta that uses this expression, the states or factors that ripen in liberation. This is called the Majjhima Sutta, which occurs in the Udana as sutta number, I didn't write it down. It's 30, I think it's sutta number 31 in the Udana. And it also occurs in the Anguttara Nikaya, the numerical discourses, Book of Nines, I think it's Sutta number 2 in the Book of Nines. So here, the Buddha mentions 5 things. He says there are these 5 things that ripen in liberation. When the mind is not yet ripened for liberation, these are the 5 things that ripen in liberation. So the 5 things he mentions there, the first is good friendship, associating with good, worthy friends, spiritual friends. Then the second is sila, that is observing proper moral discipline or moral conduct. Then comes having the chance to listen to uplifting Dhamma talks, talks that open the mind and inspire the mind. Then comes energy, striving vigorously to abandon unwholesome mental states and develop wholesome mental states. And then comes panya, wisdom or insight into the arising and passing away of things. Okay, so then the Buddha says that when based upon these 5 things, then one develops 4 things further. And these are the 4 meditation objects. So the Buddha here says one develops the perception of the unattractive nature of the body as the antidote to sensual lust. One develops metta, loving kindness, as the antidote to ill will. One develops mindfulness of breathing in order to abandon distracting thoughts. And then one develops the perception of impermanence in order to arouse or generate the perception of non-self. Okay, so these are another set. Actually, the 2 are not completely different. We have the 5 spiritual faculties, which include energy and wisdom. Well, and then we have the 5 factors mentioned in the Majjhima Sutta and the 4 meditation objects, which lead to samadhi and to insight. So the 2 sets overlap. So Rahula must have been developing these factors over the years, and now they're all mature. His mind is right at that point, just all the accumulations or all of the contributing factors have been accumulated. He just needs a discourse from the Buddha to trigger off the final realization. And so now the Buddha calls him, and they want to go off to have a private talk. And then it said, on that occasion, many thousands of deities followed the Buddha, thinking, today the Blessed One will lead the venerable Rahula to the destruction of the asavas. And according to the commentary, these deities had previously, in a past life, had been companions of Rahula when Rahula made his first determination, in the future I want to become the personal son of a Buddha. Then those thousands of his friends were present. Well, having thousands of friends seems an exaggeration. But that's what the commentary says. And so they were present and they rejoiced in his aspiration. And then through their own merits, they had been reborn in the celestial realms. And now they must have been able to know what is taking place in the human realm and realize that Rahula is about to achieve the final realization. And so they all gather to hear this discourse. Okay, so then the Buddha gives Rahula a discourse basically on the three characteristics applied to the six sense bases. So the I, and we've gone over this before and we'll come to it again, so I'm not going, and the time is very limited, so I'm not going to explain the principles in detail, but we have the eye, ear, nose, etc., are all impermanent, dukkha, and non-self. And then the Buddha goes through the six sense objects, the six types of consciousness, six types of contact, six types of feeling. So you see, this is reproducing the same content that we found in the discourse to Anathapindika. And so all of them are impermanent, dukkha, non-self. And then in paragraph, what's given here is 428, the Buddha also brings in, since the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, as well as their objects are material objects, so that represents the form aggregate. Now, and then the Buddha has spoken about consciousness as well, but, well, here he brings in the mental factors that arise through contact associated with feeling. He says, is anything comprised within the feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness that arise with mind contact as condition, is that permanent or impermanent? Then he goes through the three characteristics. Okay, so now in those paragraphs, the Buddha is giving, we call the basic groundwork or material for the development of insight wisdom, seeing all the factors of experience as impermanent, unsatisfactory, and non-self. Then comes the consequence of that insight. Seeing thus, the noble disciple becomes disenchanted with the I forms, I consciousness, and so on. So we have here disenchantment, a kind of inner disillusionment with them and turning away from them. Then he becomes disenchanted with all of these other groups of objects. Then there, in my edition, the paragraph was missing. Somehow it dropped out. I don't know which edition you have, but let's see if it's there. It should go, when he becomes disenchanted, then he becomes dispassionate. When he becomes dispassionate, his mind is liberated. And when his mind is liberated, then there comes the knowledge. It's liberated, and he understands birth is finished, the holy life has been lived, what had to be done has been done. Now there is no more coming back to this. You have that in your edition. Okay, so mine is an older edition. Okay, so that is what the Blessed One said. And then the text continues that the Venerable Rahula was satisfied and he rejoiced in the Buddha's words. And while the discourse was being spoken, then through not clinging, you see, the end of upadana, the Venerable Rahula's mind was liberated from the asavas, from the taints. And in those many thousands of deities, there arose the spotless, immaculate vision of the Dhamma. All that is subject to arising is subject to cessation. Okay, that formula means that these deities, they didn't become, with regard to Rahula, the mind liberated from the asavas, that means he achieved arahantship, the final stage of the path. But in the case of these many thousands of deities, they gain the direct insight realization of the Dhamma, which means they don't at this point, they don't become arhats, but they become either stream enterers, once returners, maybe in some cases non-returners. the lower three stages. Okay, that's a pretty quick run through the Rahula Sutta. Okay, I think we have to go up for the meal now, but we'll come back and then we can take up any further questions or comments, points for discussion. Let's do it a little, since you have to walk down 12:30, we'll be back here. Okay, so let us end with the sharing of the merits. Okay, I'll just recite the verses. By now you should have memorized them. Okay, so we share the merit with the thousands of devas and the bhutas, the yakshas, the dragon spirits. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanam. Oh, I'm sorry. It should be, speaking about memorizations, it should be chirang rakantu sasanam. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanam. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe devanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe bhutanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe satanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya Pavagupadaya avichihetato etantare satakayupapana rupya rupicha asanya sanyino dukkha pamuchantu pusantu nibuting. Okay, then we end with 3 half bows to the Buddha. Okay, 1, 2, 3.